All right.
Here we
well,
go.
how's it going, bro?
Good.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Gladtrad podcast. This is funny. So this is episode 9, which isn't technically episode 9 because it's technically episode 10, but it's also technically episode 13 because we had 3 episodes of Live from Quarantine. In case anyone really wanted to know, which absolutely nobody wanted to know.
Basically, what we have to do is we have to work on our naming conventions.
Yeah, so. I thought Live from Quarantine would go a little longer, honestly. I thought it was going to go till next May at least.
Who has patience for that?
Thanks everybody for joining us. We see a lot of familiar faces. Hello to Kim, Zachary, Anthony, your darling fiance Ashley, Zach, Shane. I saw was in the chat earlier. Thank you all for tuning in. All the people I didn't mention.
My boy Shane.
Mm-hmm. How's the week been going so far, Rudy?
It's been okay. It's been an okay week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say.
I mean, it's not great.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're still alive, still kicking.
But yeah, hanging out with friends is good.
I mean, we now formed a St. Vitus Rocket League team coherently.
A Rocket League league.
A Rocket League league. Yeah, it's Rudy, yours truly, and our boy Anthony. We had our first real bro session last night, so that was pretty fun. We're gonna kill everything. I think we can start destroying the rival churches out there. Start challenging our Mormon friends, all those whoever plays Rocket League, I guess.
Yeah, there's no such thing as war anymore.
No, there's only police actions.
Yeah, we only fight on the battlefield of Rocket League.
Now I see one thing that you did this week also is that your pipe treasury has grown.
Yes, it has, and you inspired me.
Oh, I did?
So.
Oh, that's sweet.
In case you didn't know, everybody, today is also show and tell.
Oh, I didn't bring anything.
Somebody complained to me that we talk too much about pipes, and I don't see how that's possible because we don't talk about them
not nearly enough.
Considering our name says that we smoke pipes a lot, we hardly ever talk about it.
We had only one dedicated episode. Now we're gonna have 10. Thank you, person who said that. All the episodes.
Well, Ventura is open, people. So if you're tired of living in quarantine, you need a little bit of normalcy in your life. Get your butt out to Ventura. Ash and I went out and we went to an Irish pub. So.
You went inside?
Yes.
You got to sit down and everything?
Yes.
Masks?
Yes. No masks.
No way.
No masks.
Okay, that's only.
But it's still there's only 5 people in there.
Of course, the first place you go is an Irish pub.
Yeah, I mean,
naturally.
we were craving food.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that was open was the antique store.
That's so cool.
I got a bunch of pipes to restore.
Oh, it's not fair.
Inspired by you, because I'm going to be trying to start a small little restoring business.
That's right. So I'm going to hype you up. So Rudy actually, besides being a pipe aficionado, also restores pipes. He gets a bunch of estate pipes and restores them, and it's actually a really cool little operation. So I was like, you need to start an Instagram page, bro, because it is seriously the coolest things ever. And I will film some madness for you. I got
Jordan,
you.
You're the devil, bro. I finally got off Instagram, and you're like, get back on.
Get back on.
Get on Instagram.
Why are you off the grind? Why are you off the grind? Why are you off the grind? So that's great, though, man. So
take more photos of whatever.
If you need a pipe restored for the young trad in your life, look no further than, you have a name for your Instagram page yet? Or are we still shopping around?
Still shopping for a name.
All right, cool. Well, chat, if you have any names for Rudy's pipe game on the side, please go ahead and leave them because we would love to see that. That's cool. I'm really happy that Ventura's open. I've been missing antique shops, something fierce. I like military antiques. And there's actually it's a gun shop in Culver City whose name escapes me, but it's huge. And one of the cool things about it is, besides having all your modern weaponry, it also has a lot of historical stuff. So I held a Prussian needle gun. Looks like we have some technical difficulties with our St. Vitus flag, which I'll fix in a second.
The flag is sorry guys, there's no mast right now.
That's right. So it's yeeted itself off. I'm gonna fix that real quick because we're just trying to break up some of the gack in the background, which is a film term. So hang on. Does that look good? Lower. Don't order me around.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, now I promise it'll hold up.
All right.
Let's shoot. Okay, so if here, I'm gonna raise my hand. Do you wanna if we can hold our hands and just breathe in real quick? It's okay. No homo. If you say it before. There you go. Mm-hmm. No, you can't see it in frame. Okay, so...
Are we going to do the Our Father?
Well, I mean, we could if you want to. I don't really know how...
The kiss of peace.
The kiss of my friend.
Peace be with you.
Dude, you know what I love? Let me tell you what one of the coolest things about the new rite is. Oh, the old rite. Wow. You see that Freudian slip? But when the kiss of peace is exchanged, like, the priests just, like, go like this to each other, and it looks so Chad.
Yeah, it's like...
You know? It's like, I got you, bro. God loves you, bro.
Brother.
Now it's like, instead, of course, you'll see in the Novus Ordo where the worst part is when I've seen, like, the priests and the servers come off the altar and go through the pews, like, celebrity status, you know? Like, everybody just has to have it. And then, you know, teenage Jordan's like, I just kind of don't want to... I kind of just want to pray right now. I don't want to touch anybody, but of course there's always...
Yeah, it's literally right before the Eucharist.
And you know what's funny is my dad, so I'll never forget this too, so especially around cold and flu season in Colorado, my dad would, every time after the Kiss of Peace, would always produce a little bottle of hand sanitizer, which would always be really adamant. So I'd get done, like, you know, shaking everyone's hand, peace be with you, and kind of sit there, and then this little bottle of hand sanitizer would just kind of sneak through my vision. Thanks, Dad. I know my dad watches this, so shout out, Dad. I love you. But okay, so let's hop into it. Today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to all close your eyes and maybe hear a wind chime or two coming out of some very prominent churches near my neck of the woods, is ecumenism. The lovely, great, beautiful thing that is ecumenism, or true ecumenism, as we're going to be talking about. And especially, it's certainly very topical because this year, as far as Catholicism has gone, has obviously, that's loud, has obviously had some very interesting highlights in the ecumenical movement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, actually, you and I have been also, aside from Rocket League, one of the cool things that we've tried to get off the ground that Jordan and I have a lot of discussions about the SSPX and their status and Lefebvre, Archbishop Lefebvre.
They are growing, yeah.
God rest his soul. And, you know, we've just been trying to figure out, you know, all kinds of different things, like why hasn't this been done? Why was this deal rejected? Blah, blah, blah. So we just got down to the point where we were like, look, this is dumb. We're just getting in circular conversations here. Let's figure this out. So we started reading some of the Vatican II documents.
Thank you for the mention. That's absolutely right. Okay, so yeah, it's one thing to... Here's a funny thing, right? It's church documents, no matter what they are things that we fight and die on, but to actually go into the documents themselves, into the letter of the law, especially about Vatican II, and read them, is important. This conversation came about because one of the, with the inside documents of Vatican II, as far as the society is concerned, there are objections or theological errors, as they call them, concerning particular parts of different documents. And the big question that Rudy and I are having is, were these problems always evident to the society? If that's the case, why did Lefebvre sign the documents, which he did? If Lefebvre signed the documents, did he later recant, I guess, about signing the documents? So we started with Dignitatis Humanae, which is the document from Vatican II on religious freedom. And so what we've been doing is we've been having these fun little Rocket League sessions, and then we'll just kind of generally peruse into a document, and we have like 10 tabs open on each of our computers about like what the society's response is, like what other like in the traditionalist movement might say, what like some of our favorite sites have a commentary on it, the history and development of what this doctrine has meant. It's right now we're not all the way done with Dignitatis, and we've have a whole conundrum of opinions on it, or just like assessments of it, that we'll probably get to in a later episode. But one of the things that is, I think the blueprint's a little harder, or it's easier to see like how it developed, is when we get into talking about ecumenism and the church post Vatican II, because we've gone from, I think that there are ways that Catholics have understood extra ecclesia nulli salus, the way that we've understood our relationships with not just Protestants, but with entirely other religions. Like a lot of that stuff has changed it in this direction. And I don't think all for the better, because we can't forget that it was in the new ecumenical movement that Second Assisi happened. For those that don't know, this was a in the 1980s with Pope John Paul II, a lot of dignitaries from all the world's religions and sub-religions, minor religions, I should say, gathered in Assisi in what? Remember the name of the church?
I don't, off the top of my head.
The point is, it was a chat. If you remember, I know that somebody does. But the funny thing is that this happens, and it's an ecumenical movement. So it's about like goodwill towards all men, regardless of religion, that sort of thing. And what's funny about this is that it was a Buddha was actually placed on top of the tabernacle inside this church. And so for a lot of Catholics, what's a clear representation that in the social kingship of Christ, that Christ becomes subservient by the literal placing of an idol on top of the body, blood, soul, and divinity, that which houses the risen Lord. And
then the roof collapsed on that tabernacle.
There was an earthquake. Yeah. We're not saying that, God doesn't like work A to B like that all the time, but it's not, let's just say some things are surprisingly providential. This is funny because you would think that this happens in 1986, there probably was a huge uproar about it. Rudy and I weren't alive at the time. But if something like this happened today, which we see in places like Abu Dhabi, for instance, or in the Vatican itself with the Pachamamas, the uproar is huge. I think that the Pachamama scandal kind of derailed a lot of the Amazon Synod in a way, because that's all anyone talked about, and rightly so.
Well, I think the cool thing, too, now is people... Like, the trad movement is larger than it ever was. And we also have... more of a power to speak, with internet, with YouTube, for example. And so I think back in the day, they just didn't have the means to get...
It's like the old media, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To get their voice out. And now we do. So that's why I think this synod on the Amazon became a giant, cluster F, because... Everybody was watching it, and everybody was able to see that they were bowing to these idols in front of the Pope, and nothing was done about it. Well, thank God for our friend Alex Shubuel, who threw them into the river.
Hero of the Tiber.
It's kind of crazy, too, because later on it became known that Taylor Marshall paid for this guy to go back and do that. So that's pretty badass. Like, you talk about using your money wisely and for good, not for evil. I would say that's like the peak example of using your wealth to like get something like that out of there, because it was so scandalous, not only to us, but imagine how scandalous it is to God.
Well, I mean, here's the thing too to think about with the whole ecumenical movement. So what is ecumenism? Well, the idea of ecumenism, at least as far as Christians are concerned, is dialogue for the purpose of unity. That's at least the classical way of understanding it. In the history of the church, this is a really, really lofty way of saying ways that we can get our fallen brothers and sisters, our broken away brothers and sisters, Protestants, Orthodox, those outside the church, into full communion with the church, right? Because again, like every Christian, like every Protestant, what a Protestant is just by its definition is a almost like a heretical Catholic in some cases, or at least a fallen away Catholic, even if they never fully had Catholicism to begin with. But what's funny is we talk about ecumenism in the Christian kind of sense, and obviously there are still some baselines that we understand on. We don't say that Protestants don't pray to a different God than us. There's a lot of points, and look, I'm in favor of leading a lot of times, especially with Protestants, on the things that we agree upon, because you can get really circular sometimes with the disagreements, and you also have to be really nuanced depending on what denomination you're talking to. Calvinists believe something different than the Lutherans, who believe something different than the Anglicans, who believe something different than the Orthodox, who believe something different than anybody else. The problem with the ecumenical movement post-Vatican II is that we certainly have buried the idea of the point of dialogue for the purpose of unity, which only exists in Christ and Christ's church. So Catholics don't have, it's almost like you got to put all your cards on the table. If the point of Catholicism is that it is the truth, and men freely ought to accept it of their own volition, and the best way to do that is to talk to them, then that's one thing. But if we communicate with pagan religions and with false religions, and we don't say, like, look, we love you, and because we love you, like, we just got to St. Boniface you, right? We got to tell you that, like, the trees that you worship for Odin doesn't exist, like, Buddha literally doesn't exist. The Hindu gods don't exist. Allah, we'll talk about what it says in the catechism, in the current catechism, but it's like Allah is not the risen Lord, and that's demonstrably true. And it's silly to pretend. I think it's really uncharitable actually to pretend that we're really just more similar than different in these kind of really, really stark sort of ways. Which is why the ecumenical movement has a lot of these really gray area, even in regards to Catholic worship. Rudy and I were just seeing a priest doing meditations, but meditations with an obvious ear towards Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. And if you would just happen upon this, one of the comments genuinely was like, is this a Catholic church? Is this a Catholic priest? Because if you can't tell, then obviously there's a great derailment that's going on.
It's kind of sad, but I like Thomas Merton's early book, his first book, which was the Seven-Story Mountain.
Yeah.
Which was good. I liked reading it. I might have to reread it again to make sure that, that it's not as bad as I thought. Or as good as I thought, just to be safe. But it turns out that later on, Thomas Merton went down the road of Eastern religions, and he was interested in it, and he was trying to make sense of how to combine the two or bring both into one sort of entity. And he ended up dying in Thailand. He was electrocuted by a fan as soon as he jumped out of the shower. It's kind of a crass joke, but one of the comments in this video of this priest, by the way, this priest, he's like in front of an altar.
Yeah.
And he's like a Japanese samurai pose, like he's like on his knees with like a kimono, and he's like adjusting his kimono. It doesn't have a collar on or anything.
No, in fact, yeah, he looks like it's pure like samurai Eastern robes, yeah.
And so he has a bald head. He kind of looks like Thomas Merton. One of the comments was I thought Thomas Merton died.
Oh, so bad.
So no, I mean it's bad. Yeah. But guess what? Guess where that church is? It's not too far from us.
No, it's here, isn't
Starts with a J.
It ends with a
Jesuits. It's a Jesuit church.
I feel
it's one of the nicest churches that we have around here.
So beautiful.
Called Blessed Sacrament in Hollywood. And every year they do a procession of the Blessed Sacrament throughout the streets of Hollywood.
Yeah.
I've never actually been. I bet it's probably like Life-Team. But,
better than nothing.
But it's better than nothing. But, who could be surprised? It's the Jesuits. It's the Jesuits.
People who know me know this. I think that historically the Jesuits are my favorite order. Just reading about what the Jesuits did in regards to the faith in the New World, to read about what the Jesuits did in regards to the Far East, like the Jesuits used to be called the Pope's Men, and one of the reasons they were suppressed in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, was because that their loyalty to the Catholic doctrine was at odds a lot of times with the states, the empires that they were coming in contention with. So the Jesuits, for instance, were on the forefront of things like baptizing natives. Why would you baptize natives? Because if you have Christian, by the virtue of baptism, you become both a citizen of the church, you become a son and daughter of God fully restored, and you also become a subject to whatever crown you're under, because that prince is sovereign to the Christians of his domain, which means that there are certain rights that you can and cannot do to your subjects as king, which is another reason. So there's not just, it's a weird world of I would say proper Catholic politicking that was a lot of that. That's why a lot of the suppression of the Jesuits wasn't theological, it was political. That being said, nowadays, unfortunately, the Jesuits as an order are just on the forefront of so much progressive, so much pseudo-ecumenical sort of stuff, so much flirtation with non-Catholic, not even non-Christian sort of beliefs and philosophies. They do a lot of the These meditations. These, see, I don't even know. They do, yoga, right? There's now like rosary yoga rosary kind of stuff. And it's like I don't want it to be a bad joke, but there's a meme where it's like day without Jesuits tricks, and it's like 0. And I wish that was just a joke, but I can't deny it that as an order, yeah, they've been really, really bad. But yeah, one of the problems, of course, is so I'll think about it this way. So what's the problem with ecumenism? Well, again, on the surface, if it is dialogue for the sake of Christian unity, there are obviously some extreme good positives about that. It is really nice to talk to Protestants and not feel like we're at each other's throats, depending on how you want to go about it. But what you have to do is we have to just understand that, us understanding that the church is the truth, that Christ puts it in its complete form inside the church, inside the sacraments, doesn't mean that we have to be triumphalist left and right about it. But it just means that at the end of the day, the way that a lot of post-Vatican II ecumenism has looked at it is, well, every religion has degrees of truth.
Right, that's the natural law perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The natural law perspective says that, indicates that there's a way for humans, because of their intellect, to be led towards God and towards truth, right? But I don't know, that's tricky for me because, you and I were talking about this again when we were reading the document. The document is essentially stating that in a more theological way than I did, because I'm not a theologian. But it's stating that, and my problem with that is that our intellect can be clouded. And so I don't know how to square that together when a document like that would say, this religion over here may not be, Christian or whatever, but somehow it kind of sort of gets in there. I don't know.
Well, the question is, what's that actual bearance on salvation look like? So if I was to come to you and say exactly what Jesus was asked, right, multiple times, like, how am I to enter the kingdom of heaven? And the answer isn't, well, what are you doing now? Yeah, it kind of sounds good. You just kind of keep doing that. It's like I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And Christ doesn't say that to just exclude and mess over everybody. Quite the opposite. It's an invitation into the risen Lord. Thus, we have to be with other religions. It's like, I love my neighbor, and I have to love my enemy and pray for those who persecute me, which is really, really hard. But what it means is, when I had this wonderful last year, this wonderful series of conversations and debates with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I almost fainted with delight because I love debate, right? I love interreligious debate. I really, really love apologetics. And what's the purpose of this? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses didn't start by saying, yeah, you as a Catholic are fine, you just keep doing what you're doing. No, they're there because presumably for the love of my soul, in their mind, they want me to be saved. The only way to be saved is through Jehovah and Jehovah's Church. Now, it's incorrect because as a Catholic, I'd say, no, the way to be saved is through Christ and Christ's Church we founded 2,000 years ago. But we're having this proper kind of dialogue in and around that. We're not being triumphalist about either of their points, but we're obviously very clear, there's no, not dubious, but there's no secondary reason. The truth of the church isn't being buried just because I'm trying to play nice. Mm-hmm. And one thing I think about is, you shouldn't make bad theology for the sake of niceties. So people do this all the time. The easy example is this. Somebody dies, and it's a funeral, and it's all really sad. But what do we say? We go, well, don't worry, they're with the angels now. They're in heaven now, right?
They're looking down upon
you. And it's like,
don't ever do that for us, guys.
Yeah,
if you know us, don't do that to us.
Not for me, please don't.
I'm going to be burning like a, I don't know, like a crispy skin or something.
I'm going to be so happy when I make it purgatory.
And I'm just totally having a horrible time.
Yeah.
And nobody's praying for me because I'm with the angels now.
Yeah. I mean, but that's what it is. It's like doctrine's water. It doesn't mean that you're not saying, I do this. I go, okay, I'll pray for the repose of their soul. That is the kind and theologically correct Catholic way of saying, yes, this person's shot to salvation. I want to help as much as I can now. Grace says, pray all the rosaries for the boys. Yeah, we need them, honestly. But the problem with, I think, a lot of ecumenism is that we kind of skirt around that a little bit. And so for me, the biggest example is in regards to Islam a lot of times. So in the current edition of the Catechism, formulated under John Paul II, there is in paragraph, I think it's 964, but I could be wrong. I'm going to just check a little tentatively on my phone. But the history of the Catholic Church has been wondering, how do we assess our relationship with Islam? And I was under the impression that Muslims and Christians do not worship the same God. That the history of the Catholic Church, the history of Islam and Christianity is demonstrable proof of that. Now, inside the Catechism currently, there is one paragraph. It's actually 841. Sorry about that. And it says, the Church's relationship with Muslims. The plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator, the first amongst whom are the Muslims, who profess to hold the faith of Abraham, and together with us adore the one merciful God, mankind's judge on the last day. out of the entirety of the Catechism, one paragraph, a very, very ambiguous kind of paragraph, just assessing what is a huge, like a history of the church kind of not taken into perspective. So I was listening to a panel it was Robert Spencer and Scott Hahn and a couple other really, really highly...
Spitzer?
No, Robert Spencer. Spencer's a priest, but Robert Spencer's the he's a Greek Catholic guy. His entire life is he does Jihadi Watch.
Okay.
And so it was about Islam, like Islam and the relationship with the church, because Robert Spencer has devoted his entire life to debating and debunking this whole ecumenical way with Islam. Again, not to just completely just dunk on Muslims left and right, but if you ask Muslims themselves, this is the truth. It's like, do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Let me tell you why not, right? Let me tell you why this is an ecumenical problem. Ask what the qualifications of God is. For Jews and for Christians, we call God Father. Muslims don't. And actually, to call God Father is offensive to Islam. Why? Because Father is a human term. And by doing that, it actually restricts Allah. But because in Islam, Allah is all-powerful, all-creator, He is, it's never going to be a relationship of father and son. Allah is master and we are His slaves, is how it goes. And that's not Catholic propaganda. That is precisely by Islamic text.
And so therefore it isn't feasible for them, for God to enter into the world, into our humanity, because they think that's a sacrilege to God if we think that.
Yeah.
So that's one clear distinction on why we don't believe in the same thing.
Yeah. And it's like, you got to acknowledge it. Here's another thing too. So on that point, they say people, so especially in the ecumenical kind of way, go, okay, well, Muslims believe that Jesus was here. And we say a couple of things. First off, Jesus wasn't divine in Islam. He was a prophet, but guess what? That doesn't actually work. See, Jesus can only be three things. He can only be the most deceitful, lying man who ever lived. He can be totally crazy, or he can be the only begotten Son of God. Those are the only three scenarios. So when people go, well, even people who aren't necessarily Muslim or Catholic or Christian, but you hear people go, oh yeah, well, Jesus was a great prophet. He taught so many things. Like, that was wonderful. He taught people how to share, all the jazz. The answer is, well, no, because if Christ wasn't who He said that He was, if Christ saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life was a lie, then no, He's not a great man. That's a horrible man, in fact, right? And so what Muslims say is that not only did Christ exist as a prophet, but he wasn't crucified, but instead He was made to look like He was crucified. So the resurrection doesn't exist, because in order for Christians to understand this, we have to understand that, yeah, God has to die, descend into hell, and be raised up on the third day. And there's actually a whole discord inside the Quran where Jesus goes before Allah and is asked the theological sticking points. Did you tell the people to worship you? No, I told the people to worship none but Allah. I mean, it just goes on and on. There's this perception that Muslims, that the Trinity is wrapped up in the Quran as Jesus, God, and the Virgin Mary, not the Holy Spirit. And there's speculation that they were encountering Aryans, actually, instead of just like Eastern Christians at the time.
That's the E. Michael Jones makes that theory up, or maybe he doesn't make it up himself, but there's probably somebody else. But anyway, the theory is that the Muslims were pushed down to a particular area of the Middle East, and their only exposure to Christianity was from the heretics that were outcast. And so they got a deformed idea of what Christianity and therefore what God is. And so then they, because the Quran came much later than any of the history of the scriptures, they had a deformed idea of what God was, and so, or Christianity was. So then, they created all these different ways to square a circle.
Yeah, put a square hole in a round peg.
And so here we are, thousands of years later, and we believe. I don't know. It's outrageous to me to read that paragraph in the Catechism, because it's so obviously not true.
Yeah, this is, and I should mention, because it's not like this isn't like a heretical position. The Catechism contains two things, right? First off, the Catechism is an obviously magisterial authority, but that doesn't mean in and of itself that everything inside the Catechism has to be dogmatically believed. The Catechism contains dogmas of the Catholic Church, things that as a Catholic you are bound to believe. But there are also things inside the Catechism which you as a Catholic aren't bound to necessarily agree with, that doesn't make it into this realm of mortal sin. Just to clarify, so for example, again, I can as a Catholic say Muslims do not worship the same God as the risen Lord, which is demonstrable, which is for most of our history has actually been apparent. And that's not incumbent upon mine or your souls to believe that. And it's not a disobedience against the church or the teaching of the church. It's just not, like, it's especially by the Catechism standards, like, it wasn't something that was hotly debated or anything like that. And another thing that I want to bring up is that, it's like, why Islam in particular? It's because lately, especially in ecumenism land, we have seen things like the Abu Dhabi Statement, which was a statement that Pope Francis made. He was in where? Do you recall?
Abu Dhabi?
Well, Abu Dhabi. Yeah, of course he was in Abu Dhabi. With the... I'm drawing such a blank right now.
Some imam.
It was a huge imam. But my point being is that in the document it talks about... And we've seen this done to death in the trad world. So I'm not going to bring up the whole debate again. Bishop Athanasius Schneider asked him later if what he meant when in the document it says that God willed the plurality of languages, sexes, but also he willed the plurality of religions. And so that's where you had a huge debate on God's permissive will versus his active will. And people were saying, well, the document by the letter of the law says that this is an active will of God, that if God permits, God actively desired the creation of male and female. Right? The language one's weird for me because I don't think that God actively willed it, because otherwise Babel wouldn't make any sense. But he did kind of redeem himself, or at least language was redeemed, I would say, at Pentecost. But then you have the plurality of religions, and the answer is no, that God actively wills, as Christ prays at the Last Supper, that they be one like I and the Father are one. So, you just get this huge amount of confusion, and I'm not saying that we have to just crusade for the rest of our lives unnecessarily, but yeah, there's just for the desire of playing nice, we've made this bad theology. The Islamic God doesn't have a lot of qualities shared with our God. There isn't the whole statement of political Christianity doesn't involve the fact that we have something called like a just war concept, and you can wage unjust war upon non-believers in Christianity is huge to our belief. This isn't actually something that's present in Islam. We are infidels in Islam. And that means that there are infidels and there are apostates. And there's a whole different set of codes to treat people that way. The Quran says to fight the unbelievers. So you have three options if you're a non-Muslim, right? You can convert to Islam, which is the first and the one that's most preferable to them. You can pay the jizya, which is a tax for non-believers. And also there are certain qualifications in Islamic law you have to follow, like a non-Muslim can never rank higher than a Muslim. And this is apparent across the entirety of the Islamic world still. And the third one, of course, is to fight the unbelievers and force them to convert, or raze their cities to the ground.
See, that's the difference between us and them, is that we can't go out and force people to become baptized, because that is contrary and negates the baptism. You can't be forced into it. You have to desire it.
Yeah.
But we still have to go out there and figure out creative ways to bring Christ into the world. We are emissaries. And not just emissaries for anybody. We're emissaries for the King of the universe. I mean, that's what we believe. And we've gotten to a point in history where it almost doesn't seem that way anymore. I mean, Bishop Fulton Sheen, he talks about how Christendom has been destroyed, how it's dead. Christendom is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. It was on its dying. I mean, he said this in like the 60s or 70s, so by now it's buried. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we don't have a Christian culture anymore. So what we have to do is to go out and really bring back that tradition with a little t, or maybe it's a big T tradition. Big T tradition of spreading the gospel.
It is literally the Great Commission.
It's the Great Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do that when we're having conversations like, oh, well... I mean, it's hard to do that when you look at the catechism.
Yeah.
The catechism is what we say, like, that's the go-to. Like, you have a question about the faith, go to the catechism.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
and now you find out.
And you see that.
And look at the logical conclusion. If I read, of course, in 841, okay, well, Muslims and Christians together adore and worship the one true God. Why would I want to convert?
It's a contradiction.
Yeah. Like, why would I? With the Jews as well, right? I mean, there's a huge question in the church, which is like, well, what do we do about Jews? Should we like try to convert Jews?
Yes.
The answer is yes, of course. And why? Because that is literally like, when a lot of Jews convert, and what I love about Jewish converts in particular is they are very adamant about, it's not a conversion, it's a fulfillment. And so they're like, we're just coming to like the fullness. And that's what you want for people, for everybody in the world. Christ tells us to go out and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Not go out and, if you feel like it, say a thing or two, but here these people are with me. And it gets even murkier when we go into things like Eastern philosophy and paganism. Although once upon a time, that stuff used to be even clearer, I would say. St. Boniface is a perfect example again. Can you imagine? Okay, so it is apparently a mistake nowadays to throw Pachamamas into the Tiber. But St. Boniface chops down an Odin tree, and that's like the linchpin of his sainthood, is saying, this is a monument to a false god, but it's here that I'm going, and builds a church out of them, and says, here I'm going to build a monument to the one true God. There's a history in the Americas, and of course, the history of the Americas and the conversions are there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. There is, of course, a lot of forced conversions and forced baptisms. But what's very funny about that is people forget that a lot of times peoples would convert to the faith because the king would convert to a faith. And they would grow and develop in their own faith because of that point. So religion, as we kind of think of it as a choose your own adventure, wasn't the case all the time. The entire Christianization of Britain happens in this kind of way, and of northern Germania for that point, into Scandinavia. It's Christian missionaries going out and spreading the gospel, and a king going, okay, well, either believing fully or at times, of course, doing it for political reasons, but the fruits would still be there. And that's that they would foster the building of churches, the protection of monasteries, the safeguarding of religious laity alike, and these kingdoms would be incorporated into the entire concept of Christendom. That's healthy ecumenism. Not going there as Christians and drawing out our swords and saying, kill them all, let God choose our own. One thing to remember, a good example of this is during the First Crusade, a Crusader army went north into Germany and started killing Jews. And this is actually one of St. Bernard's stories, because this was condemned by the Vatican. All those crusaders were excommunicated. Saint Bernard has examples of writing against and saving Jews in this kind of instance. So yeah, we want everybody to be converted, but we're as Christians, of course, we're not called to convert by the sword. Our Lord makes that very, very clear in the Garden of Gethsemane. So yeah, ecumenism doesn't mean that we have to just tiptoe and be nice and pansy about it. But yeah, it doesn't mean that the lack of ecumenism means that we have a justification to have anyone convert, pay our own jizya, or die.
I think maybe we're talking about it in the macro scale, right? But one of the things that helps me is to talk about it in the micro scale. Like in your own family, how are you sharing your faith with your family members? And I have a hard time with it. I actually I've actually cut off relationships with certain people in my family because we just, we can't have an adequate conversation. And in fact, it's always from the other side, coming into question why I'm Catholic or why I believe the certain things that I do or that the church teaches. And so it's difficult. I think one of the hardest parts of true ecumenism is to share that with your family. I don't particularly come from a very strong Catholic family. In fact, most of the people in my family don't practice the faith. And I think it's kind of true with Ashley's family for the most part. And so skirmishes happen all the time. Little fires come out, and how do we share that with them? Well, you start off with with the good news.
Yeah.
Why? St. Paul talks about be ready to talk about why we believe the things that we do. And that's my paraphrase, right? So you didn't say that.
Yeah.
You didn't say it like in those words, right? Unless you read it in the King James Bible or something like that.
Hey, oh, that's so mean. It's okay.
Jordan likes the King James.
I just think it's less clunky sometimes than the.
I like the Dewey Reims.
The Dewey is a great. Okay, yeah.
So you start off with, look, my life is a mess right now, and I have good days and bad days, but for the most part, like all of the horrible things that are taking place right now.
Yeah.
And I'm still I'm here. I'm still sharing it with you guys here on the podcast, with you and with my friends. And there's nothing that I would trade in the world. I would never trade my faith for anything in the world, you know, because this thing that we believe in is not just our life here, the short amount of life that we have here in living in the world, right?
Yeah.
It's something more. It's eternal. It's something we're believing in something eternal. We want to be with the Father, okay? And Christ has come into the world to give us a blueprint for us to be with Him, to be eternally happy and fulfilled in God. So that's what we have to go out and share, especially with our family, and especially with the Muslims, especially with the Jews, especially with the Jehovah's Witnesses who come and they think they have like the whole of the truth, and the reality is that they don't have it.
And but here's the thing. This is the one thing, because again, I there are some examples like on that where I will praise Jehovah's Witnesses on one particular faction. And this is actually just in general for Christianity. One thing about Christianity, which is why you can actually see that it's true, especially as far as philosophy is concerned, religion is concerned, is because if you have a truth that's going to save people, you have to tell people about it.
Yeah.
Christianity is the only religion, outside Islam probably, that works like that. The difference, of course, is that we spread it joyously and not by the sword. But it's not just like a political system. But it's true. It's like one of the reasons we have this podcast, one of the reasons we're glad trads, is because there has been so much joy and grace working in our hearts and our lives, and we have to get it out. It's our attempt, feeble or as great as it may be, who knows, but it's just our attempt to get out the things which we have found true and sustaining, and things that have changed our lives for the better. And that is the door of the gospel. That is the Great Commission. It's being able to draw, and not just those outside the faith, but there are millions, maybe even a billion, but there are millions of Catholics who are not in love with their faith. And when I hear stories all the time, I think of some of my favorite apologists, guys like Scott Hahn, guys like Stephen Ray, who would talk about plucking up Catholics, the proper things to say to pluck up a Catholic. Non-Catholics or ex-Catholics are the second largest denomination in the country, right behind Catholics. When I think about how many of my friends, people who I love, people who I care about, who have explored, even in my family. Now I'm fortunate because I come from a family that has a pretty strong kind of Catholic identity. Oh, there goes the flag again. They have a strong kind of Catholic identity, but it's fraying, and I see that. And I feel like if there was just more of a fight or an understanding about how authentic our faith was, rather than allowing our faith to be just a choose your own adventure and figure it out as you go, and if you're not Catholic, well, God loves you, so that's perfectly fine. It's like, no, it's not fine, and I can't force you to fall in love with Jesus. But we should be out there, if we're in love really with Christ and we want to serve Him, we should be out there being like, this is the truth. So we do this because not only is it going to make your life extremely better, but just look at the effect that it has in its totality. This is the truth. And our souls are restless until they rest in Thee, O Lord. This is the reason that we exist, and we need to fight harder for it. And we should be a little triumphalist about that kind of a thing, instead of just putting Catholicism on the shelf again as one amongst many other options you can choose.
I'm reading this book by Kennedy Hall, and I have to give a plug to him. Ashley, thank you for getting me this book. It's called Terror of Demons. Kennedy Hall was just recently on the Taylor Marshall podcast. And there's an interesting chapter there talking about, there's a tendency in our culture now to say that people in the past who were missionaries, especially like the missionaries to like the indigenous people here in the United States, were colonizers. Have you heard that before?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
I work in Hollywood.
you can never get into a discussion with an atheist or anything like that without them bringing out that, old reliable. You colonizers, you came over here and you killed a bunch of indigenous people and you forced them and did this and that. But in one of the chapters of this book by Kennedy Hall, he talks about the North American martyrs. And the North American martyrs came here as missionaries to preach the gospel to the native people. I think it was the Iroquois and the Huron.
The Huron, Jean de Brebeuf.
Yeah, and there was another one too. Well, as they were doing this, the indigenous people obviously had mixed reactions to it, and some of them didn't understand, and others maybe were more hostile towards the gospel. And so, one of the missionaries actually left because he was having a hard time and he just wasn't getting anywhere. Sometimes you have to know when to shake off the dust from your sandals, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that he came back, and when he came back, it wasn't to force these people or anything. He came back because he had a great love for these people, and he understood very deeply that he had to convert these people. He had to share the gospel with these people so that they could be saved. And unfortunately, on the second time coming back, he was martyred. Well, how can we say that they were colonizers? It spits in the face of these martyrs who went into the world to preach the gospel and had found at the end of their life to give their life for the gospel. They weren't forcing them themselves on anyone. In fact, they were doing the most charitable thing that you could ever do, which is to say, look, you don't understand. You don't understand that this is God, and that you could be a part of this. You could join into something that is far greater than you could have ever imagined. That's the most charitable thing that we can do for our family, for our friends, for all these people. I know it's tough. I mean, look, how it's, just think about it. Sit right here and think about it. How are you going to talk to your secular friends about this sort of thing? How do you even approach the conversation if all you talk about is worldly things like, just idiotic pop culture references, that sort of thing? You have to make time. You have to make an effort to do that.
One of our friends, Raven, in the chat says, it's not a fight to explain, it's a fight to show. That means converting. Understanding is by show of love. How do the fruits bear in your own life in order for someone to see the richness of faith, actually? A Raven, that's absolutely right. Part of making peace in the world starts with making peace inside yourself. Part of Jordan Peterson says, before you step out the door and solve the world's problems, try cleaning up your room and making your bed first.
Jesus says it a little bit better than Jordan Peterson.
I was just doing a reference. Of course, Christ does, obviously. But this is completely true. It's people. I'm a kind of guy who adores the argumentative and adores the theological great arguments and the nuanced differences of Protestantism and different kinds of Protestantism and Catholicism and different philosophies inside Catholicism. But at the end of the day, a lot of people do convert because of the great demonstration, the great witness that people have in their own lives. For you, in your own families, you might be the only barons of the faith that they know. The only example of a Catholic that they've ever seen. I know, a lot of times I am pretty much the only Catholic and maybe at times even the only Christian on set where I am. So if you were, speaking, lewdly, and if you're dressing a certain way, and if you're...
Yes, be careful. You have to be careful.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because if someone says, well, that's what a Catholic does. And in fact, that's a lot of the stereotype. We see poll after poll from all over the place that Catholics, in terms of religiosity, by and large, need to fall back in love with Christ. And that goes for all over the empire. That's not just Catholics who attend the traditional Latin Mass. That's not just Catholics who attend the Novus Ordo or any of the other rites. It's something that we all need to work on. And one thing that's important for the ecumenical discussion is, I have friends and family too. It's a lot of family and friends who are searching, and it's like, if they come with me, if they are interested in what I have to say, it's one thing to talk the talk, but is Jordan actually walking the walk? Am I living my life according to the tenets of Christ, or do they? Oh no, he just is a church Christian, right? He just goes to church on Sunday, thinks himself high and mighty, talks about getting saved to us, and then he moves on and lives with his sins. And that's why it's a constant ecumenicism even on ourselves, not ecumenicism, but it's an entire conversion even on ourselves. It's an entire reassessment and constant assessment of making sure that we are being more conformed to Christ's will instead of less conformed, instead of going about our own way or setting up our own little church with us as Pope, And one of the things about Rudy's point on the great martyrs of the New World, especially, is that, a lot of those men, they didn't go because the state or the empire was funding them. These were church missions. And in these men's writing, take Jean de Brébeuf, who we have the Brébeuf hymnal named after at our church. He met a horrific death. He was also a Jesuit, by the way. Really good. And, just horrific death. But he learned the Huron language. He learned a ton of different languages to talk to these people about the gospel. He would take songs that the people sang, and he would convert them into theological messages and stories from the Bible in order to convert people. And they burnt him at the stake, and they skinned either his flesh or they skinned two of his compatriots' flesh. Just the most horrific deaths. And he couldn't stop until his dying breath to sing about how much he loved Jesus, how much he loved the Lord. That's a real witness to the faith.
And his death actually converted the people that he was sent to, because they were still having difficulties in believing what he was saying, but seeing his great witness of being a martyr for God, for the love of God.
Yeah.
That was enough for them to just say, look, this is real. This is real. Your friends, your family, the people you reach out to, the people that you see in the grocery store, you're the only encounter that they may have with the Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to try really hard.
Try really hard.
So it starts with you.
I think, what I feel like, and we all know this, it's true. I didn't know the term. I didn't really come to the last thing as me as a Catholic had to kind of really, not the last thing, but one of the things that took me time to really develop on was understanding what extra ecclesia nullius salus is. And I think that if we look at the whole history of the modern ecumenical movement, it is essentially a shelving of the concept that outside the church there is no salvation. If you don't need the church, if you don't need Jesus to be saved, why would you evangelize? So when we have in the Amazon Synod the great things we can learn from the indigenous people, when we have bishops of the region boasting that they haven't done a single baptism in their entire tenure there. And again, this is the part of the world where a lot of very holy men and women fought and died for the sake of the faith. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And you just understand just how far we've fallen, because if the assumption is, well, as long as you're a good person, you're saved, or as long as you, and by good person, I mean as long as you don't kill anybody and you're not Adolf Hitler, you're good, then what's the point of anything? What's the point of it all? And I think that part of reclaiming that, of course, is being rigorous with understanding the reasoning for salvation in our own lives. That means frequencing of the sacraments when we're able to again. That means confession. That means communion. That means adoration. That means studying up on the faith, being strong in your faith. It means being very gentle, because not everybody's going to respond in the same way. I have family who's walked away from the faith, and sitting down and saying, hey, this is why you should be a Catholic again, isn't going to cut it. God might be, if they trust God, God will lead them to where they need to be. But they'd have to reach out their hand as Peter did, and Christ will grab it, So it's just important to remember that it's not enough to think, well, they're good and I don't have to worry about their souls. No, you should. And you should also keep worrying about your own soul. And the importance is that we're doing this all because Christ has a great promise in his resurrection of paradise for us. This is the pearl of great price. This is the greatest reward we could possibly imagine. We can't even fathom heaven and being with God forever. Why would we want to not give that to anybody, especially people that we really do care about?
Yeah.
So.
All right, what are we mad about today?
What are we mad about today? Well, lockdowns are still happening, and Can I just say that it's not even like, I'm not even mad, I'm just tired. You know what I mean? I'm just tired, guys. I'm so tired. I'm just so tired because our priests in particular are really working hard to make a lot of ends meet on a lot of different sacraments Rudy and I have been talking about, trying to get people to communion, trying to get people confession, trying to get matrimony started up, like everything. And it's just, there's no wiggle room currently in the Diocese of Los Angeles. And there is wiggle room in some parts of it because of the local bishops. And I feel like it's such a brick wall. Tired trad. That's exactly right, Grace. I feel so drained. And I think that for years, this is going to, it's something that we're going to come out on. And I think we'll be stronger for it in some ways, especially on the parish level. But I think this has just proven that what the heroic witness of the faith is. Talking about ecumenism and extra ecclesia. If things are a necessity, wouldn't you as a priest or a bishop do everything in your power to get the people to mass? And I was on, and of course, like, people go, well, we have a dispensation, which is true. But here's the funny thing. For all of our Christian lives, we're told that you want to start your process of sanctification, frequency of the sacraments, daily mass if you can, daily communion, right? Confession, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever it is. Like, these are all the steps you should take growing to love the Lord. Like, just come to his church. We're told that on and on and on. And then it's gone, and you know what they say? They say, we have a dispensation, so, like, what do you care? I'm like, make up your minds, people.
Well, it's almost like the same problem we have with ecumenism now. It's like, oh, well, you're kind of okay where you are.
Yeah, that's that, yeah.
You're all right.
We're just waiting on
You'll be fine.
This is an example of people when people talk about the what are they called? Like the martyrs and the religious people over in this part of the hemisphere as colonizers. They often talk about the empire. This is an example of where the empire and the church should be completely split for a reason. Like, Newsom should not dictate when a church should open. That's kind of the whole point of America. It's kind of the whole point of the First Amendment.
Right, and a bishop should never allow a secular person to have any jurisdiction as to how the church can open or how it can practice its religion. Like there's like statements that have said you can't distribute Holy Communion this way or this way. We recommend you doing it this way. And it's like, man, like, what do you think you are, dude?
Well, that's exactly it. Ugh.
And then I just kind of wish we had a bishop with a backbone who wasn't deferring to the government to dictate to him when he can open. I don't know, man. It's just, it is very draining. And you and I had talked about how this is the peak example of clericalism.
Yeah, that's actually completely true.
They talk about all kinds of other things being clericalism, but this is the prime example. Like, just give us the mass back, for goodness sakes. We haven't had it for nearly 3 months now. I'm at my wit's end, dude. Ashley and I are under two. We're like a little bit over 2 weeks from the date that we were picking to get married. Jeez, so yeah. Everything's just kind of effed up, and I'm just sick of it, dude.
What's the worst thing is this? The worst thing is you, for instance. I know, like, you've gone to the drawing board. Our priests have gone to the drawing board. Everyone's gone to the drawing board. Small. What can we do? Like, let's just do something. I know that there are people who will go, well, the mass isn't a rite, and you know this, but the fact of the matter is
that, man. That's just such a weak excuse.
Well,
we don't deserve it. It's like, obviously.
But here's the thing. Like, think about, like, your favorite saints. Like, I think about this all the time. There are so many saints. One of the reasons, speaking of ecumenism, one of the reasons that so much of ancient Rome started converting to the faith is because in times of plague, the Christians were the only ones who stayed behind. Because here's a funny thing. For Christians, it's incumbent upon us to bury the dead. To nurse the sick, to bury the dead. That's literally ingrained. That's a tenet of, that's the corporal works of mercy. That's not in Roman paganism whatsoever. Roman paganism is very much that the strong shall serve over the weak. The weak are just there for fodder for the strong. There's not this comeuppance. There's not this great understanding and equalizing between rich men, poor men, great men, lesser men, as there is in Christianity. And so that is what I mean when we say that sometimes the secular culture, the new Rome that we have inside society, the Rome right now to tell you to stay inside and be scared and be afraid and don't do this and you don't need church and you don't need all this kind of stuff, is complete bunk. It's not true. And I feel I've had a spiritual drain, you know?
Yeah.
I've hit a plateau and then it's tilted, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's gone down and it's like you want once upon a time when a man was made bishop, it was a guaranteed martyrdom. I'm very, very happy that we don't live in a day like that anymore. But these men were such heroic witnesses to the faith. Priests at the time of the Cristero Wars and beyond who would have their fingers cut off so that they couldn't say mass. They couldn't consecrate the hosts and would try anything to do to say mass again. Instead, what's happened is that whether it's been to the laity or whether it's been to the clergy, there's been this great shuddering of, well, no, we're just going to defer. Don't worry about it. Everyone's dispensation, like they're good. Like, what are people complaining about?
So much for men of brave faith, eh?
Hey.
Archbishop Gomez.
Well, pray for Archbishop Gomez, of course, please.
Good book of yours, brother.
Oh, that's right. That's the name of his book, isn't it?
It's the one that you're given if you're a discerning priesthood.
We got a lot of opinions, but this is the Gladtrad podcast,
and that's why.
That's what we're stopping with.
Glad, and we end off with just a little bit of angry.
Just a little, a lot of resignation.
Look, guys, we're not robots, okay? So
wait, we're not. I'm like the one from, remember that indie movie with like Ex Machina?
I wish I had sound effects like.
What? By the way, thank you everybody who has stayed with us as we end the stream. If you would like, please, of course, if you like, it's an order. It's by Pain of Excommunicado. Go ahead and like. You've left comments, which is plenty. But if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit that notification bell on the way down there. It's that little bell. It looks pretty cool. It is absolutely awesome. We're on a road to 100. We get 100 subscribers. We get to do community posts. We're only 15 away. It's a small goal. Tell your mom, tell your grandma, tell that sister who's walked away from the faith. I guarantee you they'll do it.
Canon 777 states that if you do not smash that like button or share it with your friends and family, become a subscriber, hit the bell notification.
Wow.
Let him be
anathema. Jeez, God bless Trent.
So, that was Trent?
That's Trent.
That was the catechism of the Gladtrad podcast.
That's right. Oh, we start instant SETI. If you haven't already, by the way, we are also available where all podcasts are. You already know that. We're also available on Twitter at gladtradpodcast. So you can follow us there, say hello, whatever. And I think that's it. Anything else you want to say, Rudy?
No.
All right.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Well, from the boys over here in Dreamland.
Guys, if you want to play Rocket League with us...
Oh, that's right. Tell them.
Play with us.
Play with us. Okay, look, Rocket League is a cross-platform game. I'm just going to do a plug. If Psynonix wants to sponsor our podcast, they're welcome to. You have an Xbox, you have a PC, you have a PS4, hit us up. We would love to play Rocket League. It's cheap. It's $20. It's a ton of fun. Anthony is our boy. He's been doing well. If you don't play Rocket League, you might be anathematized too, but I got to read that in the Catechism of Florence. Who knows? They never produced a catechism, actually. All right, guys. God bless you. Merry